In today's episode, we're unpacking a topic that every consultancy owner with business partners and next-gen shareholders needs to understand: how to structure shareholder voting rights the smart way. Because the way that you set this up will determine how decisions get made in your business, who really holds the control, and whether your business stays aligned or ends up in a deadlock. Hi, my name's Josh Stone. I spent 10 years as a director and shareholder of a 3 million engineering consultancy that we grew to a 30 million multidisciplinary firm across engineering, town planning, surveying, and architecture. I've seen what works and what doesn't when it comes to how shareholders make decisions and how that flows through to the boardroom. So in today's podcast episode, we're going to be, really breaking this down into three parts. Firstly, we're going to look at the difference between shareholder and director voting rights and why most business owners get this confused. Second, we're going to look at the two main ways you can structure your shareholder voting rights, and I'm going to take you through the pros and cons of each. And thirdly, we're going to look at or talk about how to think strategically about voting control in your business so that your business can make smart decisions quickly without friction. So let's get into it. All right, team. So the first big idea that I want to explore with you today is this difference between shareholders versus directors. Like they're two, sometimes business owners get confused, but they're two very, very different roles. So I want to talk you through that, the whole process now. Essentially, the difference is shareholders own the business and directors run it. So shareholders own the business and directors run it. And you can obviously have directors that are shareholders and shareholders that are directors, but shareholders own the business, and directors run it. Shareholders vote on who sits on the board, not every business decision that comes up. So I want to talk about this in a bit more detail, but essentially shareholders have the right to vote in board members or directors of the business and vote out board members or directors of the business. So shareholders vote on who sits on the board, but they don't, this is where business owners get stuck, is they let shareholders, or they put into their shareholders deed or agreements the ability for shareholders to vote on all sorts of things in the business. And that just, it just trips the whole business up. So shareholders own the business, directors run it, shareholders vote on who sits on the board, but shareholders don't vote on every single business decision. What happens then is, so shareholders have voted on the constitution of the board and who sits there and who's a director. Directors are then empowered by the shareholders to make operational and strategic calls on behalf of the shareholders. So essentially the shareholders are saying, we vote you in board members and directors. We are giving you the power, or we are saying we trust you to make good, sound, operational and strategic calls on behalf of us to return us a really good return on our investment in the business. So I want you to really think about it. And I guess I see this all the time where business owners come unstuck as they really start to grow. Like, you've started the business, you're a director, you're the sole shareholder. There might be 3 or 4 of you potentially that are directors and shareholders, and you've all got equal equity, but you all own 100% of the business. And then as you start to think about, next gen shareholding, you start to think about my exit strategy from this business, how do we, bring in next gen shareholding into the business? And you bring on other shareholders who are not directors because you want to empower people through next gen shareholding, which I think is a fantastic idea. You're empowering people to have skin in the game and equity. But if you don't think this through properly, it can get really confusing. It can really muddy the waters if shareholders have, quote unquote, too much power in terms of the decision making or the voting rights within the business. As you get bigger, you're going to have minority shareholders. You might have people that have 1 or 2%, and you don't want to have to go to those shareholders every single time you need to make, as a director in the business, every single time you need to make a decision about, hiring someone or spending 10 grand over here to do X, Y, and Z. So I wanted to start with this in terms of shareholders own the business, directors run it, shareholders vote the board in. Directors are then empowered by the shareholders to make operational and strategic calls on behalf of the shareholders. This separation just keeps the decisions efficient. So essentially, shareholders vote on the board and the directors run the business in the day to day. And without getting into too much detail, your shareholders deed should stipulate what decisions in the business need to go to shareholders for voting. And that's just it's a very small list. Usually it's like, we want to sell the business, we want to vote in a director or get rid of a director. They're the only things really that you want shareholders voting on. Most of the other stuff is directors are empowered to run and make strategic decisions on behalf of the shareholders. So I just wanted to clear that up first, because problems really arise when this line blurs. For example, like shareholders trying to make day-to-day calls, or your shareholders deed saying that you have to go to your shareholders, everyone, even someone that owns 0.5%, for just a really minor decision in the business. So that's the first big idea. I just want to really clarify the difference between shareholders and directors. Okay, so the second big idea, or the second thing I want to talk to you about in today's episode, is there's two common voting models from a shareholder's point of view that I want to talk to you about. I want to talk you through both options, the pros and cons, and whether, when you should consider it in your business. So there's two voting options in terms of shareholders. I'll go through them both and I'll go through them in a bit more detail. So the option one is like percentage-based voting based on ownership. So it's weighted by ownership. So if you've got four shareholders, someone owns 60%, someone owns 30, and then the rest is made up. If something has to go for a vote at a shareholder level, that person who has 60% ownership in the business, 60% shareholding, their vote gets a 60% weighting, as opposed to someone who has a 10% equity in the business, their vote has a 10% weighting. So that's the first option, percentage-based voting weighted by ownership. The second option is one person, one vote. It doesn't matter how big your shareholding is in the business, one person, one shareholder equals one vote. So what I'm going to do now is talk you through both options. So like I said, option one, percentage-based voting weighted by ownership. This is, so pros of that, it reflects the true equity ownership. So if you've got more skin in the game, you've been around longer, you've got more ownership in the business, it reflects your true equity in the business, and it means that you get more weighting in the decisions of the business. Cons, and so we experience this. What happens is when you start to bring in smaller shareholding, so say, you offer 1% to a senior person in your business, 0.5% or 3% or something like that. The cons really are that as you start to grow and you put things to a shareholder's vote, it can really start to silence those minority shareholders, leading to disengagement or resentment, because the minor shareholders are like, what's the point in voting? My vote equals nothing. Every time something goes to a vote, the person who has 60% equity in the business just gets to overrule everyone. So what's the point? And so what happens is, as you grow and you bring on minority shareholders, it can start, this weighted by ownership voting model can start to silence them. And the whole purpose for bringing on next gen shareholders to get more engagement, to have ideas, to have people to take over the business from you one day, kind of goes out the door, because they're like, well, what's the point in me hanging around? I never get to make any decisions anyway, and it might backfire. So this kind of weighted by ownership model is very common in smaller consultancies, where like the founder or a couple of founders hold majority control, and the founder the founders want to keep it that way. So they want to be able to offer smaller equity positions to people, but they don't necessarily want those people to have a very big say in certain things in the business. So that's option one, weighted percentage-based voting weighted by ownership. Okay, so the second option is one person, one vote. So every shareholder, no matter their percentage equity in the business, has one vote. And so we got to this point where eventually in our journey, 30 million business, we had about 19 or 20 shareholders. We had that experience where minor shareholders were saying, what's the point in voting? What's the point in being part of this business? My vote doesn't count. I never get to have a say. So as we grew, we recognized that in order to keep minority shareholders engaged, in order to really look at that succession piece closely, we needed to shift from this weighted voting model to a one person equals one vote. Doesn't matter whether you're the majority shareholder or not. every vote cast is equal. So pros, like it creates equality and a collaboration. It's very, very useful in partnerships with aligned values. It's very useful in keeping people, minority shareholders, engaged, particularly if you want those minority shareholders to eventually buy the business off you and become majority shareholders. Cons can create decision-making paralysis. Like when you think about it, like if depending on how your shareholders deed is structured, you'll have a certain percentage of votes that you need to get something across the line. And like really good practice is to have something that's like, we need, these are the things that need unanimous votes, i.e. we need 100% votes to get this passed. And that might be like selling the business, buying another business, that sort of thing, so that you know that every shareholder is aligned. You'll have things in your shareholders deed that say we need 85% votes to get this across the line, 60%, 50%, whatever your shareholders deed should say or does say. But yeah, the cons are, if you've got 20 shareholders, it can take a very long time to get things across the line if there's hung votes or you don't get enough votes and that sort of thing. So I guess they're the two options. I know I've explained the pros and cons of each and when you would start to bring those options into play. I guess like the takeaway from this piece is really thinking about, well, from a strategic point of view, like just the right structure depends on whether you value control or collaboration. So, you know, the weighted model might be as a majority shareholder, you still really want to have the say in terms of how things play out, and that's totally fine, but you still want to have shareholders in the business. So you might go the weighted option where you can start to bring in minority shareholders, but they don't have a big say in how things play out. Or you might go, no, I really want a collaborative approach. Every shareholder's opinion in the business is valid and worthy, and you might go to that one vote to one person. Doesn't matter which one you choose. Well, sorry, it does. So think strategically about how you want your business to play out. Think big picture and long term as well, and think about the pros and cons that I've just covered. But whatever you choose, you've got to make sure that it's documented clearly in your shareholders agreement. Really, really important that your shareholders deed or shareholders agreement covers whichever option very, very clearly. All right, so the third thing I want to talk to you about is, and it leads on nicely from that last point, is really like strategic alignment and safeguards. So, you know, the real goal here isn't control or maintaining strong control in your business. It's clarity and alignment. So your voting structure and however you want to do it in your business, it should reflect like your long-term intent in the business. So whichever option you go with, and it's totally fine to pick one. Like we had the weighted model to start with. And then as we grew and got bigger, we chose to redo the shareholders deed and agreement. Obviously everyone had to vote and say yes on that. We chose to redo it as we got bigger to the one vote to one person. So it doesn't matter which one you do, but it's, you sort of think about like the future long-term intent of your business. Are you building your business to sell it? Are you building it to run for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years? Do you want to reward key staff with small equity parcels and have them have a say? Do you want them just to have equity but not have a say? So you've really got to think about like the long-term strategic play, whichever option you choose. And also know, obviously you can change it, but once you have a shareholders deed an agreement in place, obviously then you've got to pay someone to update it and get everyone to vote, and it's a bit of a process. But yeah, have safeguards and that sort of stuff. So like I said before, make sure that your shareholders deed and agreement goes through all the things that need 100% or unanimous votes. Make sure you have like things in your shareholders deed around like conflict resolution, how to appoint or remove directors, and also make sure, and this is really important, like have regular board and shareholder reviews to make sure you stay aligned as a firm. Like all of the stuff aside and contracts and rules and what the shareholders deed says, like fundamentally, if you're at a deadlock or you're having big issues at a board or shareholder level getting something approved, all of that aside, like let's look at the culture. Like how are you communicating to other shareholders? What's the culture like? Has the decision or has the thing that's been put up to the board or the shareholders for approval, like has it just not been clear enough? Have you not written enough information? So when you've got deadlock or conflict or people disagreeing, I think it's an opportunity or a requirement to turn inwards and go, well, you know, what kind of business are we running here? How we built this? And do we just need to be a bit clearer and build a better culture so that in theory, pretty much everything that goes to the board or directors for voting gets 100% because it's in alignment with our strategic direction, and everyone that has equity or who is a director is all rowing in the same direction. So I guess I just wanted to say that in terms of like strategic alignment and having those clauses or safeguards in your shareholders' deeds and agreements. Now, one of our boardroom members in our boardroom coaching program, Drew, he recently went through this process. So, Drew's business had reached a point or that next stage where it wasn't just about operations, it was about ownership in his business and alignment. He wanted to bring key staff into the business as shareholders, but he wanted to do it the right way. So he spent time building out his shareholder IM, and he ran one-on-one discussions with each potential shareholder who he wanted to offer equity into the business. So the goal for Drew wasn't just to hand out equity, but to set clear expectations around, what ownership actually meant in the business, how voting rights would work, how decisions would be made, and what everyone was responsible for. So by doing that, the result for Drew was his staff didn't just buy into the business financially, they bought into the business emotionally. They understood the governance, the guardrails, the growth direction of the business. That's the power of getting this right. That's the power of the clarity in this process. Clarity creates confidence, and confidence drives performance. So I just wanted to share that quick story about Drew, one of our members in boardroom, getting guidance and direction on the whole process to set up his shareholders deed with confidence. So team, that's how you structure shareholders voting rights in a way that builds alignment in your business, not friction. So by really understanding the difference between ownership and control, choosing the right voting structure for your business and putting clear rules in place so decisions are made in your business confidently. So team, if you'd like to learn more about running a more efficient and profitable consultancy, one that grows consistently, increases revenue, and gives you the freedom that you started this business for, check out our 10 million plus consultancy roadmap training. So it's a step-by-step guide to growing from 1 million to 10 million and beyond, and building a business you can be proud of, and you'll find a link below this episode. Thanks again, team, and talk soon.